Well, g'day and welcome to XTV. And what is it? Well, it's 7 o'clock every night this week and maybe next week, depending on how it goes. We've decided that we're going to have our own show because we looked at what was offered by some of the mainstream media and decided, well, how hard can it be? We've decided to offer our perspective on how this COVID crisis is going, how we get out of lockdown, what the government is doing, what it should be doing, and some of the things it shouldn't be doing, and putting all those together. We give a sense of how New Zealand could be more like the people who pay the bills actually want it to be. If you take a brief recap of today, we've learned a few things. One is we've finally made some progress on getting the actual transparent metrics that we wish the government would put out about how this COVID crisis is going. One of them is to do with testing. They got up yesterday and said, we have done 108,000 tests. And that sounds pretty impressive, and it's a real tribute to all those people that have sat there and had the swab put up their nose, and to all of those hard-working healthcare workers who have put swabs up someone's nose many, many times. But are they testing the right people? The real question. Well, today in the Health Select Committee that we've had as an alternative to our Parliament, which is another story we could go into, I asked Minister Chris Hipkins how many of the people who have been identified as contacts have been called and traced and had a test and had the test result actually come back. And as it turns out, that of about 15,000 people who have been at a location of interest, it's actually only about 8,500. So here's the thing, one number, 108,000 tests. Yay, that's the number that they've been announcing from the pulpit. But of the people that need to be tested so we can be sure we've got to the edge of the outbreak, that we've contact traced along the chains of transmission to their end and made it clear there's no more COVID transmission occurring in the community, and we can get our way of life back by going back to level 3 or level 2 or hallelujah, maybe even level 1, only about 56% of the people that really need to be tested have been tested. And of the 108,000, only about 8,500 were actually people who'd been in locations of interest or had a reason to believe they might be part of the chains of transmission. Now, I recognize there'll be some people in there who were symptomatic and wanted to get tested. And if that's how you feel, then actually you should. However, when it comes to the government reporting on how its contact tracing and testing is going, how we get to the end of this thing and get our way of life back, what really matters is how many of the contacts have been tested. Not just tested, actually, but had a negative result back so that everyone knows that they're not carrying any chains of transmission of the virus. Anyhow, we got a little bit of progress today. The minister said that they're talking about releasing that kind of crucial data instead of what they have now. I said to them, look, you do how many people have been tested by age, by gender, by ethnicity, by DHB, but you don't tell us whether you're testing people that actually should be tested. And he said, you know what, we were talking about that just this morning. I said, that's great. What's your undertaking here? He said, they're undertaking to keep talking about it. So, hey, look, that's the way it goes. Progress can be a little bit slow when these things go along, but what else can you do? The other really interesting number, and some of us like getting into the numbers that matter, is vaccination. Now, get this, the government for a couple of days actually tried it on, telling us how many people had been vaccinated or booked out of the people who are over 40. Again, totally irrelevant group of people, because actually, sadly, under 40s can get COVID. In fact, most of the people who have been transmitting COVID at the moment are people who are under 40. Those people actually, the people that have been vaccinated or had a booking over 40, turns out 74%, the government says. Well, that's great. The real number is that they need to do about 8 million doses, and they've done a bit under 3 million. So really, a proper number that they could share is to say we're probably at about 30% of the way that we need to go. But they say, oh, well, you know, of over 40, 74% have been vaccinated or have a booking to be vaccinated, because as we know, bookings protect us from COVID-19. That's the kind of spin they've been putting out. But here's a number that they should be worried about. What percentage of the people in the current outbreak were vaccinated? And it turns out that only 3% of the people in the current outbreak had had a second dose, which is why vaccination is so critical and why this government bears so much of the responsibility, because it goes hard and it goes early on lockdowns that are so costly and destructive, but it doesn't go hard and go early on things that would have helped stop this outbreak and not stop the requirement for a lockdown, i.e. vaccination. Now, that's just a little wrap up on some of the things that happened with COVID today. And tomorrow they're going to have the Health Select Committee again. And we're going to have a representative on there from ACT called Brooke van Velden. Now, Brooke is our deputy leader, our health spokesperson, as opposed to me being COVID. And she's joining us here today to talk about some more general policy, because we recognise that at some point people might get a bit COVIDed out. So Brooke's going to talk to us a little bit about healthcare policy and housing policy. G'day, Brooke. How are you going?
I'm good, David. How are you?
Good. I was going to ask you if you survived lockdown, but obviously, you're alive. That's a good start.
Yeah, well, I've managed to make it 1 week. I'm really lucky, though, because I love the people that I'm living with. So my thoughts are really just with people who might be feeling quite isolated at the moment, people who are living alone, and that can be really frustrating. So just a little bit of advice.
You mean like me?
Yeah, and this applies to you too. One of the best things that we've heard from the Mental Health Foundation about making sure that we're keeping good mental health care at this point is making sure that we're setting a routine, continuing to eat good food, reaching out to people who also might be living alone just through a phone call or a video call, but also remembering that you can take a walk around the block because exercise is really important.
It's such great sentiment, and it is so true, especially with the current Section 70 orders where, a whole household can be forced to isolate, like really not go out until they get to 5 days from the suspected infection and are able to have a test. And with the way testing times are going, it can take them a while to get the results back. And it's certainly one of the really great things about these outbreaks is what people like the student volunteer army do, getting out and helping people. There's actually some human beauty in this whole situation. The student volunteer army, if you need help, they may be able to help you. If you'd like to help, they're really good at coordinating volunteers. They've been doing it since the Canterbury earthquake. So good on you, and no one worry about me. I go for a walk along the road and talk to a couple of journalists every day. So, life is really quite grand. Just thinking about, and I get to ask my friends like Grant Robertson and Chris Hipkins questions on the Epidemic Response Committee. Oh, sorry, we don't have that, but on the select committees that we do have. Now, Brooke, just turning a little bit to mental health, you've been really active in this area as an advocate, but not just criticising the government, but actually proposing new ideas. Can you walk us through what ACT proposes? Not for me, I promise I know, but for people that might be interested in the mental health policy.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the biggest criticisms I hear is that we just don't have good access to mental health care in New Zealand. And that's across the board. It's in rural areas, but it's also in the urban areas as well. I had a man reach out to me a couple of weeks back who said the health care that he has managed to receive through his local DHB is like a flea on an elephant's back. And he would love to be able to have a different service provider, but there just isn't another one in his area. And, the government is spending billions of dollars every year, but it just seems to get pumped into bureaucracy rather than actually going to people who actually need mental health care and addiction care. And so our solution to the problem is making sure that it's simple and efficient and easy to use. And that's by putting the person at the centre of the care. So we would take all of the money that the government is currently spending and would make it in one agency. Would call it Mental Health and Addiction New Zealand. That would be in charge of all mental health and addiction funding and provision throughout the country. So the problem that we have now is you might go to your local DHB. They get the money, the taxpayer money from the government and from you. and they themselves also provide the service. So there's a bias going on where they have inherently a desire to want to fund their own service. There are a lot of good NGOs out there in the community that aren't getting funded, and we know that are actually working. So we need an agency that actually asks the question, are we actually getting good value for the money that we're spending? And in our current environment, nobody has that job. So this organization would actually look at evidence and data on who's getting what, where's the money going, are people actually getting better from the services that they're getting? And if that's true, maybe that service provider or NGO should actually get more funding to help more people, and the service that's not working should be discarded.
So we're not talking about spending more taxpayers' money on mental health. The view is that this system would make the mental health dollar go further. And also, what about diversity? What about different people who have different backgrounds or want different kinds of service?
Yeah, diversity is really important because people do have a range of different needs. And the way we would see it working is everybody should be able to go online. You'd be able to see all registered providers who could help you. You should be able to see what sort of languages they might be able to give care in, how many available appointments they might even have. So you can actually see who can you see and how quickly. And in your local area, or particularly online. There is a whole range of different services that we should provide in our community, but we're just not doing it.
So it's about innovation, it's about competition, it's about making taxpayer money go further and giving a wider range of people better service for the taxpayer dollar. I love it. It's one of the reasons I joined ACT. Can I just switch? I know we're trying to keep it tighter to housing, another big topic. I don't know how you ended up with health and housing. We must have done it alphabetically. So two huge topics. If you can pack in a bit about housing, what does ACT offer there? Because the Labor Party, they're putting new taxes on things, just as the National Party introduced the Bright Line test. They're promising to build lots of state houses. They promised to build things with Kiwi Build, which may have actually done damage to the whole Kiwi brand accidentally. Yet, what does ACT actually offer? Because I know that we don't talk about the government going out and building lots of stuff, but is there something wrong in housing? And what, if anything, can a government do about it? I mean, just starting with, is there even a problem? Because some people will say, I listen to my mate Mike Hosking on the radio. He says, look, the Kiwi housing market is what it is. It goes in cycles, embrace it and love it. I think he might be wrong about that. Well, what do you say?
Oh, absolutely. We have a housing crisis, and it's because we have a housing shortage, but we also have an infrastructure deficit. One of the main reasons why it's so hard to get anything built is because councils don't have an incentive to actually want to build anything. It actually costs them money in rates to try and build, the roads, the sewage systems, everything that you need to connect a city for new development. And so the ACT Party has a simple solution. We would incentivize councils to actually issue more building consents quicker and get things built quicker because we would give half of the GST on every new build to the local council that issues its consent.
And so we're proposing to actually bribe councils to build infrastructure so the next generation can have homes. I love it.
Yeah, well, you look at it like this. When is the only time that a council is efficient? It's when it's issuing you a parking ticket. And that's because it knows that it gets revenue from you. And so we would have the same incentive structure for building a home.
So imagine if councils gave out resource consents to people trying to build stuff with the same enthusiasm that they issue parking tickets. I love it, and that's what we're aiming for. Anything else on housing, Brooke? I mean, how do we make sure that housing becomes as available to the next generation as Netflix and Amazon?
Oh, well, look, we have to make housing available to the next generation because it's just not good enough. And that's through asking the right question, which is how do we create an environment for investment and development? And currently the government is fixated about how do we blame other people and focus the problem on scapegoating. Let's not actually take solutions. So we would also put in place a nation-building agency that would help fund infrastructure, and it's a public-private partnership. So you look at, we can get a whole bunch of capital from people who do want to invest. This agency would help us get that vital infrastructure so we can connect new cities.
Well, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that I would hope will always offer, is positive solutions, uniting people behind good ideas, and actually trying to increase the amount of wealth out there rather than taking a fixed number of homes and bickering about who gets them, trying to attack landlords, put new taxes on things, discriminate who can buy homes with Reserve Bank policy and so on. All of that just leaves people divided. It doesn't actually solve the underlying problem. There are not enough homes in this country for the number of people who would like one. And that's why every time there's a shock, either low interest rates or high immigration, the price just goes skyrocketing up and a whole generation of people feel left out. We've got to fix that. It's essential, not just for New Zealand economically, but actually for our whole conception of who we are as a country. Now, we got a whole bunch of questions coming through, and we're going to use the second half of Act TV turned over to you, because ultimately, Brooke and me and the other 8 ACT MPs, we're funded by the taxpayer to be representatives, to hear the concerns and aspirations of New Zealanders and actually express them through the political system, which is why we were so angry about Parliament being closed this week. It's extraordinary that the Prime Minister has unilaterally decided that Parliament shouldn't sit. I had to go into the office very briefly to do something today, and I noticed that Parliament was crawling with cleaners. So Ashley Bloomfield tells the Prime Minister it's not safe for Parliament to operate. The elected representatives can't be there asking questions, but the cleaners can be cleaning the library where just quietly no one ever goes. That's totally outrageous, and that's the kind of assault on democracy that I think we need to push back strongly on. But I just got a little bit sidetracked because I was talking about representative democracy and your questions. We've seen a question here from Andrew, which is perfect. I almost wonder if Brooke didn't get this one set up because it's about your other favourite topic, or one of them anyway. How would ACT improve Pharmac and mental health? We've talked quite a lot about mental health, but tell us about the Pharmac review. Brooke, where's that up to? I thought there was something happening last Friday. It was closing or opening. What's going on with the Pharmac review?
Yeah, so the government, after being pushed by the ACT Party to make a review into how Pharmac is operating, has done a draft report. I understand that that's with the minister, but it hasn't actually been publicly released yet. And when it's publicly released, hopefully we'll be able to have more people consult on it so that people who actually are patients in the system can have their voices heard about how Pharmac's operations actually impact them, because it just doesn't seem fair that we have people who our health system deemed should just go in for constant surgeries, constant hospital stays, that could actually be more expensive than funding their drugs. They don't seem to be making a good trade-off. So the ACT Party is actually a little bit concerned that this is just going to be a rort of an inquiry because it didn't actually touch on funding at all. That's been completely removed from the inquiry. And so the ACT Party is actually saying that we should allow the inquiry to look into how much funding is adequate and how Pharmac is actually making those decisions about which drugs it's funding.
Yeah, and to give you a practical example, I don't know how many constituents I've met over the years as a local MP who are basically in the following situation. They have an illness, perhaps something like multiple sclerosis, that is going to gradually get worse over time, and they're not qualified to get the drugs until they get worse. But if they had them now, they could actually continue to work and pay taxes, for example, not to mention enjoying having much greater mobility and use of various parts of their life or body for their life. And yet, we don't actually fund them until they deteriorate further. And that example that we came across at Camp Purple, where people get most of their intestines cut out by multiple operations, extremely expensive. And yet, if they were given the drugs a bit earlier before their condition got worse, then we might have saved the money on all those operations. Not to mention the fact that it's not actually very nice being put under a general anaesthetic and having parts of your intestines removed.
And you've also got to think of the fact that once you're in that situation, you can't even hold down a steady job. I met this woman, Jess. She's in her mid-30s and she'd had surgery 30 times. And she is incredibly intelligent, but she can't get anybody to employ her because she's so in and out of hospital. We're making it harder for her because she can't get the drugs she needs to live a normal life.
Skip on to another question. We have one here from Rachel. What does ACT propose to get Kiwis to invest in productive assets and businesses rather than in housing to take the heat off the housing market? Brooke, it sounds like one of yours.
Well, it's $1 million question. Unfortunately, at this time, who would invest in anything else other than housing? Because it gives you such high return every single year. The way that we try and actually get people moving into other assets isn't by trying to incentivize people to get into other assets. I think it's by just building more homes so that we actually end up in a situation where house prices don't continue to rise at the incredible rate they do every year, which makes it the self-fulfilling prophecy where everybody has to now get into housing. We've got to just keep building more so they don't rise at the same rates, so other assets are actually attractive.
For me to you, Brooke, how's our search for another trained economist going? Are you actually the only trained economist in the whole parliament? We've been searching for another one. What's that?
I said it definitely feels like that some days.
Yeah, I thought maybe you guys could sort of seek each other out. I found the other engineers. No? Okay. Anyway, back to serious questions. What incentives will ACT propose for vaccinations, given that this needs to accelerate significantly if New Zealand is to open up and avoid the economic hit, especially on small businesses? That's a great question. Also from a Rachel, it sounds like. It's getting overwhelmed by Rachel. In fact, we're up to R² on the questions so far. I think the most important question is not what incentives do people have to get vaccinated. People are desperate to get vaccinated. I know people that have been crashing the booking system, trying to get booked to get a vaccination, and then people that have been really annoyed at the waits, and people that have been trying to take their kid along and the government won't let them book at the same time. I mean, there are these huge frustrations. So I don't think we really need more incentives for people to get vaccinated. Overwhelmingly, people are looking at the benefits of vaccination and that they want it. Particularly older people who know that COVID could have quite serious effects on them, could end up getting hospitalized, potentially put on a ventilator, or worse, potentially even die. So there's no shortage of people that want to get vaccinated, people who want to get vaccinated so they can travel. Other countries will insist on it. Some work, no doubt, will require vaccination if it means that being in that job means you could be a transmitter. So I don't think there's a problem with giving people an incentive to be vaccinated. There is a big problem in getting the government to actually order enough and have a distribution network that will allow it to happen. So if you look at drive-through vaccination, that's something they should have done a long time ago. But like a lot of things, they're scrambling to do it now. There's actually been an outbreak. It's almost as though they thought this would never happen. And now they're like, oh, sheesh, better put some plans in action. They needed to partner better with pharmacies. Still not enough pharmacies that are actually doing it. Apparently 142 pharmacies are partnering to offer vaccination. I don't know how many pharmacies there are in New Zealand, but I know it's a lot more than 142. And then the next question is, what are they going to do to negotiate with other vaccine suppliers? Janssen vaccine, for instance, approved by MedSafe 7 weeks ago. Government said Cabinet would consider it. They've subsequently gone to Johnson & Johnson and have said, well, we can't get you any third quarter of this year. If they'd thought about it and actually anticipated that MedSafe might approve it, given they were considering it, and then thought, well, if they approve it, we might want to get it and put some orders in. Then we might have some of that as well. Most countries have done a multi-vaccine strategy. So that the issues will be, can the government get supply, and can it stand up the distribution networks? In terms of intervention, I'm not so sure. Incentives, I'm not so sure. We've got another question here. One of ACT's policies is to abolish the bright line test. Wouldn't it be useful to have it for a short period, e.g. 1 year? Well, Brooke, that sounds a lot like housing to me. What's your sense?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. So the bright line test is at 10 years. So that means it's gone up from the original, which was 2 years, to then 5 years, and now 10 years. And the issue is, if it would have worked at 2 years, why did it then need to be extended to 5 years? And why did it then need to be extended again to 10 years? So no, I disagree with the idea that, you know, it would work for just 2 years, because ultimately people tried it, but, you know, it didn't work. So they've increased it again and again and again. And how many times can they increase the number of years you have to hold on to a home before you get taxed on it? The ultimate problem here is just that house prices are going up at such an incredible rate that even if you are getting taxed on it, it's still such an investment. But the problem is,
the tax is just making the government a silent partner in the speculation.
Oh, hugely so. Every time the house prices go up and up and up, the government just gets a bigger revenue, and that's all they're doing by increasing the bright line test.
We got a question here from Jack, and there's no second name. It may have been Daniels. What is the ACT Party's plan in regard to the prices of building materials and competitiveness of the market? Could the market be made more competitive? Brooke, I don't know if you're rigging these, but they're all questions in your area. What's going on with the with building material prices, and what's ACT's policy on that?
Yeah, building material prices are going up month on month. I'm hearing from so many people in the construction sector that can't seem to figure out how they should set their own prices, because every month you don't even know if your supplies are going to be there and what price they might be. Some supplies are going up by 30% every month. We have a huge shortage of materials. Part of that is to do with the supply issues that are across every industry at the moment. But we've kind of made this problem for ourselves. It's so hard to get anything built in New Zealand, and it's so hard to even get a timber mill built in New Zealand. We need to try and get rid of that RMA that's holding back actually allowing us to get resources in our own country. But I think in terms of the supply side, I know that there are some companies in the private sector who are working to get shipping containers back and forth to make sure that we can get more materials. But our essential policy here is, why do we make it so hard to actually use materials? There are a whole bunch of materials that are used in other countries that are all regulated to be seen as safe. And these are things in like California, where you've got earthquakes, you've got fires, you've got a whole range of different extremities. Why can we not use those materials easily? We should be able to import them and use them if builders want to take the risk and make sure that they have insurance on the materials that they're using themselves. We could be allowing so many different materials that aren't in short supply at the moment, but we just don't because of the Building Act.
A final question here, because we said that, you know, ACT TV is so good and you can have too much of a good thing. So we're going to wrap it up right on half an hour. A question from Matt. Matt says, continuous lockdowns aren't sustainable. What is the solution going forward? Living with COVID-19, question mark. My business won't survive lockdown after lockdown. Well, I tell you, Matt, I'm sorry to hear it. If there's any consolation, you're far from alone in that situation. I think what is clear is that the government has a bunch of tools that it can use to stop COVID getting completely out of control and creating carnage and chaos. One of them is testing, another is tracing, another is vaccination. and the fourth is lockdown. And sadly, they've gone hard and early on the last one, which is also the most expensive and destructive, and it creates huge uncertainty for business. I was just talking to someone who owns a pub, and he said, look, I'm going to have to dump all my food now because it's gone off. But even if, and it's in the South Island here, even if they lower the level and I could open this weekend, I won't have any food, and I'm hardly going to buy it to speculate. So one way or another, that business is wiped out, not just for one weekend, but for two, even if the levels lift. And if they don't, then, you get the picture. I think that is a really good example of how the uncertainty is just messing with businesses, hugely destructive. And I don't know if people in Wellington truly understand that most of the time. Well, people in government, there's lots of good people in Wellington. Now, here's the question. What is the alternative to lockdowns? Well, it's got to be those other three defences. So we need to accelerate vaccination. We've got to get that done so much quicker. We need to get testing done. We should have saliva testing. We should be doing wastewater testing every day for a virus that incubates in a couple of days, not every week. We should have contact tracing, such as the NZ COVID Tracer, constantly updated. And why not have a lottery to encourage more people to make it? If it means faster contact tracing, quicker testing, and we get out of lockdown quicker, I think it's a fantastic idea. It's actually one that's been used in different forms around the world. And once you've got that, let's stop banning technologies that could be helpful. There are, at the moment, home testing kits. The NHS will encourage you to use a lateral flow test kit. Now, not only is the New Zealand government not encouraging that, they've banned everybody from actually using them. And I think that is, first of all, really, really control freaky. But second of all, it's stopping innovation. It's stopping a faster response. So the answer to your question, Matt, is I'm really sorry about the situation that's occurred to your business. I don't think that lockdowns are sustainable. But the answers are better testing, better tracing, and ultimately vaccination. So we can do what the British are now doing and say, look, we cannot maintain elimination if no other country in the world is doing it. At some point, we have to rejoin the world. We have to get our way of life back with no more lockdowns, and we have to be prepared for the implications of that. If anyone says that we're going to do what we're currently doing indefinitely, we'll run out of money, we'll run out of investment, we'll run out of people, and people will run out of patience. So there has to be a pathway out, and the government, to its credit, has put up a very vague pathway, but it's not specific enough, and it's not consultative enough. What ACT would do is get all of the voices around the table, from business, from different parts of government, from health expertise, and would start saying, we're going to lay out what the scenarios are and what the decision points are, and we're going to let everyone decide for themselves what the options for New Zealand are, not just try and dictate from the podium every day. We seem to have a podiumocracy. So going on a bit, because it is a big topic, but Matt, we would be a lot more open and transparent, work a lot better with the private sector, lay out the options, use better technology, and accelerate vaccination and plot a pathway to getting our way of life back. All things that this government has been far too slow to do, only jolted back to reality by an outbreak that I don't think they would ever come. It's been a fantastic start, at least for us, to ACT TV. I hope you've enjoyed it. Tomorrow night, if I have my schedule right, we're going to be talking about law and order. We're going to have our justice spokesperson, Nicole McKee. We're going to be talking about some of the unexpected things that have happened with law and order under this lockdown and what the government's response has been to those, but also the wider question of what is the plan to put law-abiding New Zealanders' rights back front and centre ahead of those who break the law. The latter seem to be the priority for this government right now. That's all from us tonight. We hope to talk to you again very soon, every night at 7 this week.